Hello, hello. What a wonderful crowd. Thank you so much for being here. I'm delighted to see you all in the middle of a Thursday. Good morning, everyone. I'm Audrey Kurth-Cronin. I'm director of the Carnegie Mellon Institute for Strategy and Technology. I'm also Trustees Professor of Security and Technology here at Carnegie Mellon University. At Carnegie Mellon Institute for Strategy and Technology, which for short is CMIST, we focus on the smart development, risks, and opportunities of emerging technologies that are reshaping the landscape of war and peace. It is such a pleasure to have you here with us for this strategic dialogue with leading German industry partners, hosted in collaboration with the German Embassy. And our theme today, Transatlantic Industry in an Age of Disruption, speaks directly to the defining challenges and opportunities shaping our shared future. In an era of heightened geopolitical risk and accelerating technological change, today's panel will explore collaborative approaches to advance manufacturing and supply chain resilience across critical sectors, next-generation energy systems, advanced computing, and the modernization of the defense industrial base. So we'll look closely at practical frameworks for reshoring and friendshoring, and we'll discuss how to build secure, diversified, and innovative transatlantic industry partnerships that strengthen both of our economies and our shared values. So this event sits squarely at the heart of our mission here at CMIST, and that is to bring together strategy, technology, and policy in ways that anticipate disruption, reduce risk, maximize opportunity, and foster international cooperation. We're honored to be joined by several distinguished speakers whose expertise represents that depth and diversity of our German and American partnership. First, we're very delighted to welcome Dr. Dorothee Schneider, Minister Counselor and head of the Economic and Trade section at the German Embassy in Washington, D.C. We were just talking about the challenges of commuting back and forth with today's airline disruptions and all the rest of it. So we're especially excited and happy and pleased that Dr. Schneider has joined us. Since 2023, January 2023, Dr. Schneider has led the Embassy's Economic and Trade section, representing the Federal Republic of Germany on matters of trade, innovation, and industrial policy. She began her career at Germany's Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action in 2011, where she served in several senior positions, including private secretary to former federal minister Sigmar Gabriel, deputy head of the Office for Strategic Projects Abroad, and head of division for Sub-Saharan Africa. Her work reflects deep expertise in international economic relations and strategic development. Dr. Schneider holds a PhD in economics from Humboldt University in Berlin. Next, we're joined by Thorsten Scheer, plant manager of the Bosch Semiconductor Fab in Roseville, California, managing director of Robert Bosch Semiconductor LLC, and regional president for the Bosch Mobility Electronics Division in North America. Since September 2023, Thorsten has overseen the integration of Bosch's Roseville site into the company's global semiconductor manufacturing network and led its conversion into a facility for silicon carbide chip production. That's a key technology for the next generation of electric vehicles, among other things. Thorsten's unique background bridges science and business. He trained as a physicist and holds a PhD in economics from Fernuniversität in Hagen, reflecting a career that unites technical precision with strategic insight. Welcome, Thorsten.
Thank you.
We're also pleased to welcome Jonathan Tubb, Industrial Cybersecurity Officer for Gas Services North America at Siemens Energy Incorporated. Jonathan brings more than 15 years of hands-on experience addressing cybersecurity challenges across the energy and critical infrastructure sectors. A professional engineer in computer engineering and a graduate of Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University. Thanks for the setup.
Be nice, you Pennsylvania folks. He specializes in identifying, mitigating, and remediating threats in critical infrastructure environments. In addition to his industry leadership, Jonathan teaches a master's course in operational technology cybersecurity at Duke University's Pratt School of Engineering, helping to train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. That's quite a commute, Jonathan.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
I
No,
spend a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, well, Duke is very lucky to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're a lot closer, by the way.
I'm open to offers.
Lively group. All right, finally, I am pleased. All right, you guys, you're going to teach this, all the students by yourselves, I think. Okay. I'm pleased, finally, to introduce Harry Kresa, Director of Studies here at CMIST, and our moderator for the panel this morning. Harry joined us from the White House's Office of National Cyber Director just over a year ago, where he led cyber and technology strategy across both domestic and international policy. He co-directed the rollout of the Biden-Harris administration's national cybersecurity strategy, helped establish national modern energy security priorities, and represented the United States in consultation with foreign partners and the global private sector. A graduate of Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs, go Tigers, and Grinnell College in Iowa, Harry brings deep experience at the intersection of national security, emerging technology, and global policy. And we're delighted to have him with us as our Director of Studies. Before we begin, I also want to extend my very special thanks to Professor Martina Wells. Associate Professor of the Practice of German Studies and Coordinator of the German Studies Program of the Languages, Cultures, and Applied Linguistics Department here at Carnegie Mellon University, whose partnership and support helped make this event possible. And we'll be hearing a few words from Professor Martina at the end of the event. With that, I'm delighted to turn things over to Harry Kresa, who will guide us through today's dialogue. Good luck with this group.
Indeed, yes. It seems we will need it. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to our illustrious panel here. The U.S.-German industrial partnership has been a really storied one. It has created anchor points of advanced manufacturing in the West and has both driven and weathered big changes in technology, economics, and politics over the many years, and given the dynamism in all of those areas, likely will continue to weather such changes in the years ahead. And between the deteriorating relationships that we're facing with Russia and the People's Republic of China, with growing understanding of the fragility and risk that is in many of our critical supply chains, and major new exciting trends in advanced manufacturing and emerging technology, paired with novel risks bringing along those, coming alongside those opportunities, it is just a tremendously timely moment to be having this conversation. And I wanted to start that conversation with you, Dorothee, if you could tell us a bit about how Berlin is approaching this moment and their posture and strategy towards those kinds of challenges and opportunities.
Well, yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. It's definitely a timely topic, one that we have been working on every day for a long time now, and on different aspects, and everything is evolving the whole time. But maybe to start off where we actually are coming from. So we are coming from a situation where there are about 6,000 German companies invested in the US. Half of the investments in the US is actually done in manufacturing. And like manufacturing, so we have like the German companies bringing about $13 billion US dollars on R&D into the US, and about 3/4 of that is roughly in manufacturing as well. So this area of cooperation is really deep. Also on the other side, if you look at EU-US, we have, that's basically 30% of global trade is happening between the US and Europe. And an interesting number that I always find interesting, showing the interconnectedness of those markets is about 60% of the imports from the EU to the US is actually intercompany. So that really shows like hugely integrated supply chains, and companies kind of work US and Europe kind of like one market. And we have seen this because like, especially the companies you guys come from, they have been in the US forever. A lot of German companies have been in the US for 100 years, 150 years. And so they're deeply ingrained also as American companies as well as German companies. And the other way around, we also have similar things with American companies also in Germany, obviously. So we come from a very good space of US, German, and US, EU cooperation. Things have been a bit more bumpy, I'd say, in the last month, to put it this way. Obviously, also as an economist, tariffs are not the things I was hoping for, but give us, a situation right now where German companies who have been here wanted to invest more. This is what we always hear from the German chambers, like German companies want to really use the big and growing US market and come here. And the uncertainty that we are seeing right now is just kind of delaying a lot of projects. Like if you don't know, and maybe hear about this later on again, but if you don't know really how much it will cost to actually build the factory you want to build or to import the machinery you need, then people put it on hold right now. So I hope we're going to continue on with the steepening and increasing the numbers we are seeing there. And this is actually something that we've been telling our counterparts in Washington, D.C. a lot. It's like we want to help the U.S. on rebuilding manufacturing. We have been lucky of kind of keeping a high manufacturing base. And hopefully we'll get to the point we have the joint statement politically on hopefully gaining more certainty and deepening that certainty out of the statement in the future. But next to the classical trade issues over the last years, obviously, the term economic statecraft or economic security has been coming up. And Germany brought out its first China strategy, I think, also 2003, if I'm not wrong. And we are really following through on that. And we are working very closely together, actually, since that time with our US counterparts and kind of analyzing where are the threats. What do we need to work on? Things have changed a lot. I think we really come from a world of, the idea of dual use, what could be used in military aspects, and where do we have to cut off more like, I call it from a one piece sense maybe. And over the last months and maybe years, but really in the latest time, we really have seen the weaponization of choke points. And I think in all these things from the economic security, obviously having those integrated supply chains, we have been working closely to kind of cooperate on those things, maybe having different analysis, for example, an outbound investment screening where we say investments from the US tend to be different than investments from Europe. But the analysis of threats have been the same. I think with the choke point idea right now, we really see that we have to address the question of secure supply chains in a different way, and we have to do this definitely from government in cooperation with companies trying to figure out how can we support and go this way together. And this holds, a lot for the semiconductor industry, but also if we think about critical raw materials, for example.
Please. No, extremely well put. And when we're talking about, in a lot of cases, these advanced and emerging technologies require just tremendous preparatory work, pre-planning, investments years in advance, and uncertainty is a killer. It hurts so much, whether we're talking about the T word and our tariffs and everything, which is, I know, can be all the more frustrating when it's coming from inside the house. But also what we've learned about those supply chain choke points in the coming years, whether it was in the years following the COVID-19 pandemic, where we learned about a lot of choke points that we didn't know about before. We got a better sense of fragility along the way, or choke points that are being intentionally weaponized, right? Where we've suddenly realized that efficiency is not necessarily resiliency, right? And have created those choke points along the way. And figuring out how to navigate tariff politics and choke point geopolitics is certainly going to be probably the story of the next few years. Torsten, tell us a bit about Bosch and your experience in this space and your roles navigating all of the issues that Dorothy just so ably put on the table.
Sure. Let me tell you a little bit, give you a gauge of Bosch. Bosch is actually a privately held corporation held by a foundation. So all the money that we make, all the profits that we make in the end go to charitable causes of international understanding and other social causes, so to speak. About $100 billion in revenue, about 400,000 people working for the company. And what most people probably don't know, about 2/3 or 60% of our revenue is actually coming from the car industry. So let's say 60% of our business is a tier one, but what we call a tier one business, delivering directly to the Fords and General Motors and Teslas of the world, so to speak. The other parts we're doing, what you may have seen during the NFL commercial, you may have seen that we're also doing dishwashers and power tools, and we're doing a little bit of industrial goods as well, and then a big part also is building technologies. I get to that because you talk about the investments. Bosch is on a path to invest about a double-digit billion amount here in the US. 9 billion just went into the acquisition of Johnson Controls, part of that climate business, what we are doing for air conditioned systems. 2 billion actually go into the facility that I will talk about a little bit in a second also. So to give you a feel for, we've been in the US, Dorothy mentioned that a lot of companies have been here. German companies have been more than 100 years. We've been here probably more than 120 years. We've not only been 120 years here in the US, we've also been 35 years here on campus, so to speak, with the cooperation with Carnegie, the Institute, CBI, 35 years, if I'm not mistaken, Alessandro, and a great pleasure, of course, to be part of this community. So when I'm talking about semiconductors, we bought a former NEC factory, and we are converting that into a silicon carbide technology. As you know, our whole world is built on switches. All the stuff that you have in your cell phone, your computer is built on silicon. All those trillions of switches that you have in a modern chip. And let's say, what are we doing? We're doing high power switches. So when you see, your electric car needs switching because we're converting direct current to alternating current, you need something that can switch very high power, very, very high voltages. So, in essence, we're building switches that are 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, and about 20 to 30 of those switch your whole neighborhood about 10,000 times a second. So that's the kind of switch, just to give you a little bit of a feel for that. And let's say semiconductors, probably one of the most political weapons that has been used over the past decades. Anybody who read Chris Miller, Chip Wars, can see how that happened. And so, I'm being placed in Roseville, California, right at the foothills, not only where the gold rush started, but also very close to where semiconductors started. One was, 200 years, 100 years ago, or let's say 150 and 70 years ago. And we're now bringing production back. But when you read that book, you see how it's always been about going out in the world. And semiconductor, a truly global supply chain, where we have specialized pockets almost for everything in different parts of the world. And so it's extremely interesting to see that we have done that, and the industry went there because, of course, with an industry like that, where you have specialized pockets, also at low-cost locations or people that have specialized, we have a truly global supply chain. Bringing all of this back, imagining that you can do that for the local supply when you're virtually investing billions and tens and hundreds of billions to build up single plants and equipment, is just going to make it very expensive for the consumer in the end, because somebody has to pay it. I always say it's a three thing. We always say there's three people who can pay in the supply chain when tariffs or other things are coming up. It can be the one supplying. Well, if he has to pay that and we localize that, then it's going to be more costly, so to speak, because we're producing it here. Then the company can pay it, who's importing that or who needs the goods. But in the end, they typically have shareholders, so those pay the bill. And as the shareholders are typically private persons, they have less money to spend then if they earn less with their shares. Or really, we pay it right as a consumer because the widget that we are dealing with is going to get more expensive. So that's one part where I say, what are the impacts that we see? But the other part, what I said is, at the time when we decided that we will come to the US because we want to be very quick to introduce those silicon carbide chips, because that is an up-and-coming thing. You're saving a lot of energy for your electric vehicle. We were under the impression that 2/3 of the global supply that Bosch is really globally present. We have about 400 presences all over the world, 400 subsidies globally, so we're really almost everywhere in the world. And we were expecting to serve 2/3 of the silicon carbide needs of what Bosch supplies into that global supply chain out of Roseville, California. Main application right now is electric vehicles, will also be data centers in the future. Guess what? Here we are, and we bought the facility September 2023. Decision was made, of course, a little bit earlier than that, at a time where we thought we can sell that globally. Guess what? Here we are, and I always say, November 6, 11/29. In the current state of affairs globally, we are expecting, guess what? We cannot sell to China those chips anymore as a retaliation of all the things that are happening globally. On the other hand, of course, let's say we are a little bit later than some of the early entrants into the market. We are almost the only one. There's only one other company, Wolfspeed, who just went through Chapter 11, supplying here to the industry. So, of course, American customers are extremely interested in getting the chips. So the whole dynamic is virtually changing, sometimes truly overnight. We talked about that a second ago. We're really between Friday, 10 o'clock in the evening and Monday, 12 o'clock noon, the tariff situation changed 3 times on a 5 million piece of equipment, whether I'm paying 25% tariff or that or zero, just has huge impacts. And that just makes it truly incredibly difficult because the investment, you have a payback time of 10 years for an investment. And if you're in a situation where I don't know whether tomorrow I'm going to pay 50% tariff on my equipment, on my product, how that is all going to develop, just makes it tremendously difficult to take a robust decision. And in the end, as an entrepreneur, you always deal with uncertainty. But the amount of uncertainty that's currently injected and the volatility is just breathtaking. And so it's very difficult at this time to have a robust set of assumptions that allows you moving forward when you're thinking about putting a $2 billion investment in one place. So maybe that just as a starting point for our discussion.
Absolutely, yeah, right.
Plenty of things to talk about, but maybe a starting point.
Indeed, yes. Jonathan, a similar question to you here about you and your work at Siemens. How do you see your company and your role fitting into this selection of challenges and opportunities that we've identified here so far?
Yeah, well, what he said. So first, thank you for having me here. Don't be alarmed. I have not lost my accent. I am an American citizen. But I am here representing Siemens Energy, which is a German company. So I'll start with setting a definition in the spirit of being precise to meet the cultural needs of my German colleagues. When I think about supply chain resilience and supply chain security, I'm thinking of it from the perspective of cybersecurity. So likely, when you're doing financial evaluations, you're looking at, can I get the materials that I need at the time that I need them to continue my business operations? Is the integrity and quality of those things that I'm getting sufficient? Whereas, I'm adding another layer on top of that, right? So most of what I deal with is some type of electronic, right? Hardware or software that our customer organizations expect to run in a expected and consistent way. And one of the threats that we as a manufacturer are facing is compromise of those software type elements by nation state threat actors and others, right? And there's an element of identifying where that risk sits within the market, right? So what I mean by this, many organizations will simply procure, buy equipment for their manufacturing processes, right? I'm betting you went out to a manufacturer of chip making technology and said, I would like this model because I want to do this type of production, and you trust that the thing that they gave you is going to consistently produce the product that you want. And likely there was some consideration to cybersecurity and who owned that, both through the delivery of the system and the operation and continued maintenance of that system. And what we're seeing is, well, clearly this is a shared risk, right? The vendors that provide this equipment and the owners, operators of that equipment have to work together to ensure that these systems are stable, safe, and reliable. But now we've added this outside element of, okay, we've got threat actors who may be compromising this stuff. As a vendor, right, I can't guarantee that what I provide would be free of flaws, but you don't want to accept the risk that what I'm providing may be flawed. So, how do we come to an agreement on how we resolve that problem? And that's the way I view supply chain risk. Now, what I'll say is I've observed over the last 15 years the pendulum swing where, many organizations would go to some third-party insurer. We've seen where that really hasn't worked, right? The insurers never paid out. So then they went to this self-insurance model, but then they're sitting on a bunch of capital that they could be, investing $2 billion in, a manufacturing facility instead of sitting on it. Then we're seeing this pushback to say, all right, we're just going to push all the risk to our vendors, which of course, once you start operating the equipment, I can't help you there, right? I can consult, but that's about it. So it's a really interesting problem to see. And one kind of last topic that I'll see that I see play into this on the policy side. Historically, the US kind of led the way in the critical infrastructure space when it came to regulation. Back in 2005, we had a blackout on the East Coast that led to the formation of the critical infrastructure protection regulations, right? Fun fact, that regulation actually was intended to be vegetation abatement when it started, not cybersecurity. So tree trimming, making sure things aren't touching lines. Anyway, it evolved into cybersecurity and trying to address that risk. And that has been enforceable since 2009. Now, under our current administration, there's been this stated objective of pulling back regulation, allowing business to continue unabated, while at the same time we're seeing from our European counterparts more robust regulation coming out, NIS2, the Cyber Resiliency Act, the CRA, right? And seeing this convergence of a legacy dinosaur regulation in the US coming to terms with what is, fresh young regulation in the EU, and how those worlds are going to collide is something I find very interesting. So.
Extremely well put, and indeed is something that I spent a lot of time stressing about while in government, and enjoying working with a lot of great counterparts in the German government on how our mutual sort of industrial partnership could help us navigate those supply chain questions and the questions of who's responsible for what that you identified there, Jonathan. And so I would love to drill a layer deeper there and ask, how has for example, the war in Ukraine changed how your government or your colleagues are thinking about sourcing material for your manufacturing priorities in Europe, and what lessons have come out of that experience that you think might be applicable toward broader supply chain fragility questions, but also the 500-pound gorilla in the room that everyone hopes will never come of a potential China contingency, where even more critical supply chains could be thrown into disarray.
I'm going to jump on that one.
Please.
Just with a backstory, and then I hope you guys can add some insight to it. So I would argue that it's not a when the 500-pound gorilla shows up. They're here, right? And why I say that is for years, the PRC has had social policy to become part of this supply chain and influence and affect, right? It is national policy. It's out there, published, right? You can go read it. What I'll say is, watching the evolution of nation-state level cybersecurity threats evolve over time, right? So I'm not going to belabor the story. If anybody's familiar with Stuxnet, right, it was a cybersecurity event that happened back in 2008, 2009-ish area. And it's a first meaningful cybersecurity event against critical infrastructure. And it kind of kicked off this set of dominoes that fell that other nation states started enacting their capabilities. I was part of a large power generation organization at the time who, very similar to the campaign we're seeing with Volt Typhoon now, which is attributed to the People's Republic of China, we saw Russian threat actors doing the same type of techniques as far back as 2012, right? Maintaining persistence in critical infrastructure environments for years at a time, right? And then we saw that escalate to cyber warfare coinciding with physical warfare. This was tested out on the Ukraine power grid prior to any type of invasion, right, where they knocked the power grid out. A few years later, they did another similar attack, anticipating some type of invasion, and then we saw this happen in real time. So, there's been a lot of litmus tests over the last 10, 15 years that are leading to meaningful threats against, the Western way of being, right? I think it was Comey who said it first, but then Chris Wray repeated it from the FBI. The PRC is the greatest existential threat to the West, right? Quote, right? So for a director of the FBI to come out and say that, right, it means they have credible evidence that this is already affecting our nation and others. So didn't directly answer your question, but just kind of set the stage. Hopefully, with that looming threat, you can fill in some blanks here.
Well, to further delay my own question,
Yes.
for the benefit of the folks in the room, you mentioned Volt Typhoon and everything. This is, for folks who may not be familiar, a few years ago, Microsoft, which has tremendous visibility on IT systems around the world through their cybersecurity, sort of in-house cybersecurity apparatus, they revealed that they had found a long-term campaign by the Chinese military to gain persistent access to American critical infrastructure, power plants, water, ports, etc. This was subsequently confirmed by American testimony to Congress and declassified material that the Chinese military seemed to be pre-placing cyber capabilities with two goals in mind. One was disrupting mobilization for any sort of Taiwan rescue mission, right? Like if the PRC were to move against Taiwan, the infrastructure that we would use to flow material and personnel to the West Coast and to the Indo-Pacific. The second target seemed to be civilians, that there was a motivation to disrupt electricity to civilian Americans, to make it harder for the public to maintain the political will for such a rescue mission, to cause disruption in their day-to-day life. Which was for folks working in the cyber field, was a pretty sobering moment, and really kind of illustrated the urgency in having a better understanding of where all our stuff comes from and what all is included in it. And I know there was stories a month or so ago about finding a bunch of, I think the term of art was undocumented radios on a lot of electrical equipment in the United States that, it seems like most commentators agree it was not like an intentional hardware placement to phone to later. Sure. But rather, a supplier in the PRC was like, well, I've got two versions of this equipment. One has a Wi-Fi antenna and one doesn't, and it's expensive to maintain two versions of the same equipment. So I'm just going to keep the Wi-Fi version and just give that to everybody and worry about that later. And so while it may not have been a maliciously intentional act to put a bunch of these undocumented radios onto our infrastructure, it's a Chekhov's gun on the wall that if you know about it, boy, would it be tempting to circle back to it. So now with both Russia and China on the table, how are we thinking about those choke points, both from the public and private side now, on top of all the other tariff uncertainty and sourcing concerns that we're dealing with?
Well, I mean, from a German perspective, I think we have, in the last 5-6 years, there were like two, I don't know if incident is the right word, but two things happened. Like first we had the COVID pandemic where we had a big crush of supply chains and a very, we all remember that suddenly we had computers but no cars anymore because there was, I still to this day don't know if there was a chip shortage or just like a miscalculation in there somewhere. But anyway, so we all went through that. And then we had the war of aggression on Ukraine and the instrumentalization of German gas dependency on Russia. And obviously, that was tremendous. Like the whole war is tremendous for Europe and for Germany, specifically on the gas side. We managed to diversify our energy supply quite a bit. One is also from LNG from the US. Like I think almost 90% of the LNG we get is from the US actually. But also through pipeline gas from Norway and other areas. But also we have now 60% of our electricity is from renewables. So this is also a huge part of our diversification efforts. So this is like one part where I really feel then there was a huge role for government, obviously. I mean, even gas, LNG is bought by private companies, but it's much higher regulated space. So, the question also on do we have sanctions, where we have sanctions, there's always a game for government, obviously. And it cannot just be a thing we leave to companies to kind of deal with this, right? Mm-hmm. What we see now goes to a different dimension, though. We kind of see right now that any kind of dependency can be instrumentalized if an actor has an interest in it. I think like a lot of companies had some experience in the last weeks with Xperia chips. And this is then really the questions, how do we deal with this together? Because this is really then a question, how can we ensure that companies can navigate those risks and that, I'm a macroeconomist, so it's kind of like how can these microeconomic decisions of companies lead to a macroeconomic solution where those risks are kind of accounted for? And I think, I already mentioned rare earths. I think this is the same way. And there's like, how can we kind of create a system where we can work together to kind of deal with those risks. But I think geopolitical risks, especially if you're a small and medium-sized enterprise, is just hard to grapple with. And there is no easy solution to that because I don't think either the US or Germany will buy all the critical minerals somewhere and kind of start digging or something. But especially in those areas, I think we need to have an understanding of the old term of allies and partners, of going on this together and kind of trusting each other that we will work together on finding solutions for this and not instrumentalize the choke points against each other. Mm-hmm. I think that's, it's a big part of the way forward.
Absolutely.
So let me throw maybe 2 or 3 perspectives on that from purely an entrepreneurial point of view, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say, first of all, where we started out, let's say with a big production base, as we all know, China was the workbench for everybody. So if I have a customer who's producing there, and I'm a supplier to him, and he has 80% of his production there, and I'm thinking about how can I deliver to that customer cost effective, it makes sense to co-locate. And that actually takes out some of the supply chain risk because I'm not running the risk that I'm coming from a different country, try to get in those to get in a fight. So that makes it, somewhat attractive to do that. Nevertheless, let's say as a corporation, and we talked a lot about IP, for example, how do we protect our intellectual property? Let's say as a company, we have always made sure we're not bringing all the knowledge to that manufacturing point. So let's say if we say strategically, if you look at our company, for example, for those sensors that we are supplying into 2 out of 3 cell phones globally, our whole production has always been out of our German base for very good political reasons, so to speak. Now, if those things start breaking up, as we see them right now, I see it first falling into 2 ecosystems, potentially into even 3 ecosystems. we are investing billions and billions developing something. Let's say if you're in a semiconductor space, virtually we are investing, let's say, 10% of the revenue of a company, of of one of those business units, into developing the next generation of sensors. Now, if I start to have to do that for 2 ecosystems, for 3 ecosystems, I don't even have the people to do that. And I have to decide, what do we do? So what's really, let's say, what is the idea? And that's a little bit, then come to more recent times. The idea is, well, we have to stay ahead of the game. What is our reason to exist? Because we are ahead of the game. And you know what? Semiconductors, again, is a good example. The Russians tried to copy the American chips. They could virtually copy them, that they looked the same, but they didn't understand the mechanism behind. So, it doesn't help all of the time to just copy something physically. And we decide, well, if anything, we have to stay ahead of the game with our intellectual property. And take the example, one of the big suppliers, you were mentioning those huge machines, ASML, I don't know who's familiar with that machine, is producing those gigantic machines, the most advanced thing that mankind has ever designed. Several 100 million a piece that they do, and they do the smallest chips that they do in the world. Well, we cut the Chinese off that market and said, well, anything that's below 28 nanometers, which for most probably is nothing that they can fathom, but the fraction of something over here. Anyway, they were at the time, cut from anything that's 28 nanometers or below. That was maybe 3 years ago. Guess what? Now the Chinese are at the verge of doing somewhere close to 7 nanometers already. So that's why I say cutting off is maybe not the thing that will help us. And the question is, how do we come to smart solutions where we can protect our intellectual property that keeps us ahead of the game, but in the end we're in competition. And if we are cutting off, I mean, look at a company like ASML, in the end, it's harming the welfare of everybody if we start making that pile smaller and smaller, because all of a sudden we have to invest those billions in places 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. And how much supply chain resilience can I put in when I say, what? Where is the industry now going? Now everybody's going to India. Guess what? What did we read about a month ago? Now there's a 50% import tariff on India. So I have to, is that going to help? That India is going to be the next base for the world where we are producing? Maybe not. People have started investing into that path. So I think there may be a semiconductor industry coming up. But if we start then, actually we are reducing the market that we are building for if we do not find a significantly large set of allies. And that's what I think we have to think a little bit more. How do we make the pool of allies as big as possible? And when I read the news today, and that's now maybe not a Bosch statement, but a Thorsten statement at that part, what I'm thinking about is how can we make the pool of allies bigger? And I just don't see that happening right now. And that's what's keeping me worried, also from an entrepreneurial point. Because if now the pool becomes smaller and smaller and I have to do large investments, it gets less and less attractive to do that. So it will slow down our pace of innovation. It's going to decrease our welfare. And that's why I think, we have to find a way to move back to thinking, how do we create allies instead of enemies? And, reduce those numbers and start working together in bigger chunks again if we don't want to have a sufficient impact on our industries and our welfare in the end.
I think that's just extremely well put and sobering. And I think really perfectly crystallizes the challenge ahead of us here. We need, I think Kurt Campbell, former Deputy Secretary of State, uses the term allied scale, right? Like if you're trying to diversify your supply chain risks away from China, and China is everyone's workbench, as you said, had been for decades, you're going to need as many customers and partners as you can get. And it's all the more challenging when security and resilience are not revenue-generating endeavors, right? And I think that's I saw you nodding, Jonathan. Yeah, it's the scourge of cyber policy. I can attest as well, right? That that's a lot of what we discovered going into the pandemic was efficiency and resiliency do not go hand in hand naturally, right? A million microeconomic decisions do not aggregate up into a macroeconomic and socially optimal outcome. and unless you craft incentives correctly. Apologies to the macroeconomist. Let's say making a big assumption that the tariff situation figures itself out either by Supreme Court diktat or everyone finds a new equilibrium that they're comfortable with, and we have an allied consensus on what needs to happen, how to start rowing in that direction. What does that look like? What does it, if you had a magic wand to wave at your biggest consternations, what would the outcome be? What are you looking for that would create those sets of incentives for resilience to create that bigger allied pool as we reduce those choke points and areas that can be weaponized against us?
I leave the magic to you.
I mean, in practice, this sounds simple. Like if we all just get along by virtue of that, problems will be solved, right?
Yes.
But from my view, I think watching how things have evolved geopolitically over the last, again, 15 years or so, I think these are the worlds of supply chain risk colliding, right? So, when it is difficult to solve a problem, sometimes you just come at it with the big hammer, right? And you say, all right, instead of trying to solve meaningful data privacy or intellectual property issues, through some application of either policy, governance, technology, right? I'm just going to say, this is mine now, right? If I keep it within my walls, I can control it. But that's not how our businesses work. We're international companies, right? To say, all right, if I take this and I bring it here, and it's within these walls, and now suddenly I don't have as big an addressable market. Where does the investment make sense? So I can't tell you what we should do, but I can tell you what we shouldn't do, which is not actually addressing the real problem or the risk here, and trying to find creative ways to ignore the fact that a lot of what we're seeing now has been driven by threats to the digital components of our supply chain. I mean, there's economic elements as well, but in my world, right, the number one thing I see in terms and conditions coming across from customers is all data will remain in the US. All components will be provided from US companies, and it's like, that's just not possible. It's simply not. We're a German company. Where do you think our engineers sit? Like, I don't know how to explain this to you. So, and beyond that, right, if you are dealing with any type of international company, you have to expect that information will be housed internationally. It's, it's just the virtue of how we do business. It's how we scale things. It's how we get more efficient. So anyway, the things we can't do is, say this is mine, I'm going to keep it over here, and not actually address the risk and the problem. But how we all get along together, I'll leave the economists to solve that.
Perfect. Let me see what I can do with the wand. And no, let me just take it, let me take a step back. Let's say what has happened, and maybe that's just my age, so to speak, so give me the discretion of being Generation Dinosaur here in this round. But, we have solidly ruined relationships that we have built up over decades that were extremely hard to build up. They have been severely damaged in a heartbeat, is my perception of what I see right now. And in the end, if we want to create a network of ally, it's all about trust. And we all know the saying goes, and I absolutely have experienced that, it takes years and years and years to build up that trust. You can ruin that in an instant, and to build that up and repair that is extremely difficult. And so, if I had the magic wand, I would say, we can do that process instead of over decades again, maybe over a few years, but we have to start reversing that process. Because that, the part is also, and let's say we have to be, it's unfortunate, but our founder, Robert Bosch, has said, I'd rather lose money than trust. And a reliable, trustworthy way of doing our business is actually the one that will be the most rewarding in the long run. And that's why I say maybe that's just Generation Dinosaur who thinks like that and who has experienced that. But that's truthfully what I think we have to come to. Because the part what you mentioned, Jonathan, is, hey, let's just bring all the IT to the US, or IP into the US, right? Let's say, let me take that from a practical, again, give you an entrepreneurial view on what we had. One of the things, if I do that right now, and I know tomorrow I'm running the risk that somebody says, oh, by the way, anything that has touched a US hand or a green card holder's hand cannot be sold to whatever country, India, Pakistan, whatever, you name it, is overnight ruining my ability to get payback on my investment. And so, what do I do? Again, if you're saying resiliency, then I say I must avoid being caught between superpowers trying to exploit their power to the best they can. And I don't blame anybody for playing that game, but that's, of course, the consequence. And I think repairing those relationships and trying to build bigger pools of allies again and people that trust each other and creating that trust. My magic wand would like to speed up that process, and maybe as a first step, actually, my magic wand would maybe want to just put a stop at, continuing to ruin those relationships, but actually get in a situation where we are starting to rebuild those and really think of, okay, how can we jointly achieve things again? Because, you see that on a micro base. I see that in my little plant where I said, guys, we have to team up in order to be successful. We've done that, it worked, and the same is in the end true globally, to say, you know what? Look at that. Are we going to win if we fragment things? I doubt that. I don't see it. I just don't see any logic for that to happen, despite the fact that I say, any place where you look, the United States is the best example. Would every state by itself, be more successful if they were having their own operations? Living in California, I could say, well, what do I care? I'm the 5th biggest economy in the world. But I just don't think it's a good business model. And I think my magic wand would say, well, how do we start building up trust and cooperation, and by that, getting together and unionizing and actually spreading the good that we can bring from a society here in the Western world, which I absolutely believe, I love living in the Western part of the world with all the opportunities that we have. Let's bring that knowledge and that understanding out to the world again and unite as one.
Well, I think the thing to do before we turn to audience questions here is to ask about sources of optimism. Going ahead, right? I think we've done a tremendous job at identifying the challenges, and they are considerable and sometimes self-inflicted. But tell us about where you think your biggest sources of optimism are coming from in tackling these challenges, or what you turn to in the strength of the relationship to weather bumpy times.
Well, my source of optimism, I finally got my off-grid battery backup solar system for my house, so I'll be all right. But no, in all seriousness, though, having seen the cycle of regulation, right? Sometimes it takes uncertainty or lack of regulation to solidify and steal things that should be regulation, right? So in our period of uncertainty right now, I live in a world where I no longer have access to organizations like CISA or Five Eyes Intelligence, right? And I think, hopefully, right, it's an international community full of very smart people who all want to do the right thing for society and the greater good. And eventually, once given the runway to do so, we'll come back together with more force and more vigor to solve the problems, knowing the pain that we're kind of experiencing right now, right? We all see a problem, we want to fix it. I think there's clear motivation to do so. So that's what I'm optimistic for.
Torsten?
Well, I would agree. Let's say that, hopefully people will come to the realization and see the pendulum swing maybe a little bit less heavy day to day. As I told you, I haven't seen lately any tariff changes that just come overnight twice. So, that is helpful, and potentially that's what I hope for, that, all of this exaggeration will calm down, and, by nature, I'm an optimist anyway. And, if I want to
Such is clear. Yeah.
And you know what? If I want to give it a far shot and say, you know what? Trump has met Xi. We've seen that happen. So, maybe there is some optimism, something to be optimistic about when things calm down. And, sometimes when you're new, it takes a little bit of time to settle in. And so, that's a source of optimism, absolutely.
Great. Dorothy?
Well, I think in general, I believe on just how normal things go. They usually go the same way with the same space, and we are people doing things. I'm listening, I think, to too many podcasts and so on about, tech people, and it always feels like the end of the world is coming soon. But, in the end, I truly believe that, everything is driven by very hands-on people with hands-on stuff. So, and also just, I feel like also reality for policy is always when companies come and give their 5 cents about how reality actually works and tell that to some policymakers. And then usually, things are much less dramatic. So hopefully we get in that space. And the other thing that makes me optimistic is this group of people here, actually. So there are so many people here right now trying to think transatlantically, or coming to an event about, with the German focus on. And so I think, we are obviously still in a very good conversation. And even, if things stumble, there's such a deep connection between the US and Germany and in Europe that, I don't think it can falter anytime soon.
Well put.
Actually, there's an addition maybe. Thinking about it, you know what? If I think about it, we had the impulse that relations were somewhat harmed, but what? Due to the fact that some of that certainty was withdrawn, we saw Europe come together much closer. Mm-hmm. As a result, those restrictions that we seemed, there seems to be some closing in now, which I think actually gives me hope. There's a group of people, countries that came together much closer. And I also see, if I see that, there is a realization that between the US and Europe, we can create something great. It's a great force that we can put in place. And hopefully the latest advancements in realization help, walk down that path further. And, actually, I think a united Europe, as we see it more than ever, together with the United States, is actually much stronger. So, the external shakeup that we saw may actually be helpful, because now we have a more united Europe. Together with the US, we can be tremendously strong together. So there's additional hope for,
Thank you. I will take it. All right. We'll now turn to some audience questions here. And for our first question, I think right here.
Okay.
We've got a mic coming up for you.
Hi. Thank you. Sorry. So hi, my name is Sam Sarah. I'm a PhD student in the School of Computer Science here. I do research on AI for disaster and emergency management. And I also am an alum of the 36th Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange for Young Professionals. And I lived in Germany for a year. So I'm really curious, in kind of a self-serving technology way. So in my opinion, there's a significant investment flowing into AI research, both at US and German universities like Carnegie Mellon. But we often see a kind of valley of death between academic breakthroughs and actual real-world usage and deployment, especially in things like manufacturing and critical infrastructure. So given your experience, I'm curious to know, what would meaningful US-German collaboration look like to address some of these challenges? Do you see specific bottlenecks in translating AI or technology capabilities into your respective domains, whether that's supply chain risk and cybersecurity or semiconductor manufacturing? And where do you see where partnerships could move faster together as opposed to independently? Thanks.
You want me to go first? All right. So let me pick up the semiconductor part of you. Let's say very interesting, because Alessandro and I had a little bit of a discussion, because I said, man, I really like AI, I'm curious, but I haven't found any, I mean, do I love it for my questions? Is it better than what I had with Google? I don't have to follow anything, I get my answer, awesome. But beyond that, for my business life, what does it help me? I mean, I spend way too much time on all kinds of things. What does it help me? I haven't found anybody yet who can give me a good answer. So Alessandro put it nicely, we're looking for the killer application. So that's one of, yeah. I mean, that's honestly what it is. We all think, wow, this is really powerful. This can really be helpful. But how do we get it to an application? And I think time will show a little bit to that part, and we have to work on that. Semiconductor, artificial intelligence, I think we're already way ahead because you have a gazillion, in all of these plants, you have a gazillion data points. I mean, I have more data than I can imagine that flows out of this every second. And a lot of that we use because, as you know, we have this 600 layer processes, so to speak, where you have a 0.1 loss on every layer of that. You don't get anything out of you don't get product out at the end. So we're looking at every opportunity, and AI is a great tool for that. So we do see some of that. But in the end, let's say if you're talking about collaboration, then the question is, where do we have somebody where we generate that? Where do we have the use cases? How do we roll that out? I think that's a little bit where we have to think in the ecosystem, where I think great value is coming, that we all see that, the ecosystem is again, going in the San Francisco direction, where AI is having a huge hub, and where all those people now host together. COVID is over, so we can get together again and create great things. And that's what we see coming up. And I think, if anything, the question is, well, who does what in that big game? And then, we see that it's kind of then coming really in clusters, and those clusters attract the talents. And so, again, I think, at least from the semiconductor and with the overall view, I think we cannot neglect that the world is going to have centers of competence, because we cannot have that spread globally and then say, how do we make use and how do we keep things open so that I can easily pull on, if I have a cluster in San Francisco where AI has generated some tools, that I can pull from that. It'll make that community stronger. It'll make my industry stronger. And so I think that's what we have to make sure, that we foster an atmosphere where it's easy to draw from those resources, make use, get something out of that, and then what somebody gets from using that, we can easily bring that back. So that's why I think keeping that open is really the communication, but also to facilitate that that is flowing as free as possible is a really great advantage and a base that we have to create.
All right, so I guess I'll go next. And the reason why I'm hesitating, I'm realizing I'm a curmudgeon-y old engineer at this point, where my control system should be deterministic, and artificial intelligence is not deterministic, right? That said, right, again, for the German colleagues, let's be precise what we say when we say AI, right? So if I look at applications of statistical analysis, machine learning, model-based control, these are all domains that have been successfully applied, vision systems, kind of to the core part of the industry that I work in, right? Process control. Now, I think when we say AI here today, we're talking about application of like large language models and generative AI type applications, maybe, right? Because otherwise, like those are existing domains and they're not that interesting, right? So what I have seen, one place that it does work, right, is accelerating, honing in on information, right? But is that not competency that should exist within an engineering-based organization anyway, right? If you don't know what questions to ask, or you're a fresh engineer starting out, I feel bad. I've done this to engineers who have worked over me. I've said, all right, go research a turbo encabulator. It's perfect for this application. Go grab the data sheet. Now, nobody here is clearly an engineer who's dealt with this, because a turbo encabulator is a made-up thing, right? Back in the 70s, Rockwell put out a video talking about the benefits of a turbo encabulator, and it's multiplanar muzzle vanes and so on and so forth, made-up tech, right? However, AI will gladly spit this out, right, as something that you could apply. And if you don't have the background or somebody with the competency to challenge you on that, you're going to get wrong answers. And in the engineering domain, that's a huge issue. Now, the other aspect to this as well, when it comes to cybersecurity, yes, it can help us from a cybersecurity perspective in responding to events faster, but it's also a data privacy nightmare, right? Anything that goes in there, any party who accesses it could get that same data out. And we've again done the same thing on the cybersecurity side. We said we're going to pull this into an enclave and keep the data in this one area, and that's how we'll protect it. We know it's in here. We know that only people who have access to this system can access it. But then suddenly, if we're putting all this data into some environment that everybody can access, I don't know who's viewed what data when. Now, of course, I could enable audit tracking, but who's going to review that? More AI?
To be honest, that's not unreasonable, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, AWS has done really well with their identity access controls.
Yeah. No, it's definitely possible. Part of why I'm being so flippant about that is most organizations are not taking the time to do basic due diligence. They're like, let's throw it in there and see what we get, right? So, anyway. Yeah.
Well, I'm working for German bureaucracy, so the times of AI is still far away. And no, this is just like my outlook. But no, obviously it's a super important question, and actually it's also driven a lot by EU kind of to figure out where is the space for AI in Europe, seeing the large hyperscalers, seeing the large companies already, having very successful large language models. Do we all just need to follow the strand and create more large language models, or do we get more specialized and kind of building up AI on the areas where we are already good at and can push that technology? And to basically go back to my entrance statement, your companies and a lot of other companies are not really as German as they're also not American. They are both in a way. So I think in a way, if those companies start working on that, it will be a transatlantic approach. We also have like a very deep integration, I think on research and development. I mean, you guys know much more about this. This is your field of expertise. So I'm kind of optimistic there will be transatlantic solutions to it. And because, thinking transatlantic, I think will always be the default, because it is the closest place that has this similar approach to technology, similar approach to how we should do things. And so I'm optimistic about that there will be solutions in that direction.
Got a question way in the back there.
You're probably the answer to my question, which is I'm curious about on-ramps. So there's a lot of really great discussion. I would love to do stuff within Five Eyes. I'd love to be able to build things that are Blue List compliant. I'd love to be able to do all these kinds of things. I can go to Alibaba, AliExpress, whatever. I can get in contact with a manufacturer like right now. I want to do all of that in Germany instead. How? And so that's what I'm saying. Maybe the answer is go bother Alessandro on the strip, and he, hooks me up with all the right things, and maybe that'd be amazing. But I'm curious what that on ramp is for doing all of that, within these allied partners.
So it's a huge challenge, right? At the end of the day, we're all just people, right? And we all have immense workloads. We're being asked to do more with less. So when you figure out how to get product documentation out of my product teams, let me know. But I mean, I say that jokingly, but there is an element of, if there is not some type of central clearinghouse for coordination of this information at a wide scale, it's just not sustainable, right? Because it becomes individuals being the process, which isn't really a process. Like, the German organization that I work for, if it's not written down on 3 different policies and procedures, it doesn't exist, right? So I don't have a good answer, but I will say that it's one of the areas that has weakened here recently is trust amongst those clearing organizations, and seeing the slowdown in that flow of information, both from a cybersecurity side, but then as well just a threat intelligence perspective, right? Again, that's one of the things that I was remaining optimistic that I hope by seeing how bad it's gotten that we make it better, right?
Well, if I understand your question as just like, I want to do business with Germany.
Yeah.
Then I'm very happy to announce that we are happy to have you in doing business with Germany. No, I mean they're like very for a long time institutionalized organizations that help companies kind of get foothold in Germany. We have Germany Trade and Invest. We have the German chamber system. We have the German business communities that are more specialized in the fields that you could be interested in. I'm very happy to connect you with any of those. We also, Germany is really looking forward to gaining more investments out of the US, actually. So we will have a huge investment conference later next year. So, I think we are very happy for any kind of interest in collaboration.
That's awesome. Yeah, I guess I want to put more fire behind that to the extent that I can. The on-ramps are easier in some of the concerned parties. And so if we can make those on-ramps really smooth, that would be great for all of us.
Yeah.
Right. I think we have time for one more question. Right here.
Hi, I'm Sathwika. I'm a grad student here at CMIST, and I also spent a couple summers working on critical infrastructure resilience at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So my question is about supply chain diversification for critical hardware and software components, but specifically from a cybersecurity perspective. So do you see, in a world where we do have these really diversified supply chains, do you see that increasing the potential attack surface, potential avenues for nation-state compromise, especially in these critical areas like power grids? And essentially, how do you see the threat landscape evolving when looking at diversified supply chains?
I love this question, and it's perfect because I'm going to tee it up for the financial side of things here. So the core of the question is making the assumption that we do have a diversified supply chain, which philosophically for certain components we do. However, if I look at the life cycle of critical infrastructure, right, it is some piece of steel and metal in the ground that has a intended life cycle of 50 years plus. And then you put electronic components around that thing that need to maintain throughout that entire life cycle. So there's this cost of operation, total cost of ownership, that assumes that you will drive as much life cycle out of those digital components as possible. What this means is these are highly engineered systems that rely on each component to be designed in a very specific way. So even if you have what may be functionally equivalent pieces or parts you could drop in, it still requires significant engineering and validation on those systems to meet whatever regulation or certification that control system is subject to. So even at the peak of COVID, when we couldn't get basic servers for our control systems, it took 9 months to make our system compatible with another server platform, right? And this, like in the IT world, it's like, no, just drop the box in, plug it into the internet and go, right? Like you're done. But that's just not the way we work. So even if we have alternative suppliers, there's still this engineering qualification effort that slows this whole thing down and makes it a challenge. And I'll say one last thing here. Trying to align our engineered systems to some of the manufactured obsolescence that we see out of traditional IT suppliers, Microsoft Windows, Dell, HP server platforms, like all of this, when they're on a 3 to 4 year life cycle and we're selling systems that are on a 7 to 15 year life cycle, it's super challenging. And that's why I said this is going to tee up the financial side, because how much will the market bear in moving from one technology to the platform to the other? Because of course, you only maintain the current life cycle of the system, and if you're concerned about cybersecurity, you've got to be on that current life cycle. So.
Yeah, and I think, is it just maybe on the IT side, I can see that maybe it's more cost-effective possible. But if I say building up additional supply chains always comes at a cost. right? So that's the one thing you have to say, how much cost am I willing to bear and where's the right size? And on the other hand, I also say, well, make no mistake, typically if I start having 2 or 3 supply chains that don't go back to the same source, well, guess what? The other sources cannot cover. If you have 2 sources that can do 50%, one of the sources go down, guess what? Yes, you can still produce, but you can only produce 50%. So where is the right point here? If I want to be cost effective, everything goes down. All is dependent on TSMC. TSMC goes down, the world goes black, black and white. But having 2 is going to be an additional cost, will come at a cost. Do I see right now that some people are trying to build up somebody else who can supply that? Yes. And I think the same holds true whether it's virtual or in reality. As soon as I start creating separate ecosystems, it just gets much more cumbersome to entertain them. It starts getting less cost effective. And how much security do I really buy? And I think it's not really just, it's not something that has a simple answer to it. So I think it's a case-by-case decision to say, how much security do I want to have? Do I want to have more than maybe just a single supply? Absolutely. Do I want to afford 100 different systems? Maybe not, because the cost is prohibitive. That's the entrepreneurial answer maybe to that, that you have a trade-off that you have to very carefully weigh and to say, well, what can I really protect myself from, and what is just something where I also just have a perceived security that in the end I may not have, unless I start really fragmenting that down, and then it get prohibitive to entertain that system, so to speak.
It's the question of the era. Before we close, I wanted to turn to Professor Martina Wells for a quick note.
Yes, quick note. So thank you very much to our panelists for this wonderful discussion. I learned a lot. It was very topical and very rich. Thank you. And thank you to the audience. I'd like to add a bit of context for this event today. This is only one event in the series of Germany on campus events that we're hosting this fall here at this university. And the last in the series is coming up on Monday at 5 p.m. in this very room. So please join us for that event as well. The Germany on Campus initiative was made possible through a grant from the German Embassy in Washington, D.C., which Tracy Bonim, who's right here, the Assistant Dean in the School of Engineering, and I from ALCAL German, this post over there shows our department's name, received. And this kind of support allows us to put a spotlight on Germany, or spotlights on Germany, be that on the culture, be that on innovation, be that on global connections, or for that matter on studying, doing research, or working in Germany. Today's spotlight was on the German-US partnership offered through our amazing colleagues in CMIST and putting it together. And so next Monday will be not on the big companies, Bosch and Siemens, but it will be hosted by the president of the German-American Chamber of Commerce, Pittsburgh chapter, who will be talking about many, many other German companies that are actually at home here in our region in Western Pennsylvania, and which is a great way for you guys to connect, to network, and locally in a way with German companies. And also, if you want to talk to me about study abroad, about learning German, or like the program that Alexandra, I think, Samsara, that you were in, the CBOX program. I'm talk about anybody with CBOX. Thank you. Yeah, talk to me. I have materials for you and information for you. Thank you very much.
Please give a hand to our wonderful panel and to everyone who made this possible.